Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and welcome to the channel's annual end of year Transformers Studio Series ranking. This is a video, of course, where I take every single officially released 2021 Studio Series figure and rank them worst to best. Now, of course, you guys all know that the Studio Series went through its biggest transformation during 2021 with the introduction of the Transformers Studio Series 86 subline, and in all honesty, whilst it may have caused for a rather varied opinion, I actually am a massive fan of some of the figures that line has produced. In my personal opinion, they are some of the best that Hasbro and Takara have put out in recent years. So in all honesty, I'm actually really glad to see them featured on this list, and here's hoping that we can once again get more of a mixed balance in 2022. Sadly, considering we're primarily focusing on figures of which are officially stated for 2021, the Bumblebee movie figures as well as Coronation Starscream and Perceptor will indeed be saved for the 2022 end of year ranking, albeit I will give them a massive honourable mention in this video and say that if they were to be included on this list, 99% of them would in fact be ranked incredibly highly. In particular would be the likes of the Bumblebee movie Soundwave, as well as of course the Cybertronian version of Wheeljack and Brawn. So before we get into the video, I would really appreciate if you guys could all smash that like button, and of course be sure to let me know down in the comment section below your own personal ranking. And of course I want to give you guys a massive thank you for your support over this past year, in particular with my Studio Series reviews. They continue to be some of the channel's most popular content, and in all honesty I cannot wait to see as to what 2022 has in store for us, especially if rumours are to be true that we are indeed finally going to be getting the long-awaited Revenge of the Fallen leader class, The Fallen. So without further ado, let's kickstart this list by taking a look at my personal worst Studio Series figure that I picked up as part of 2021. So, kickstarting this list off with the worst figure that I've picked up this year, it had to go to the Transformers Studio Series 86 buzzworthy Bumblebee Cliffjumper. Now, surprisingly, not only is this the worst entry on the list, but it is in fact the newest one. I actually merely only picked this guy up 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and literally he dropped out of nowhere. And whilst the entire concept of seeing repainted characters is very interesting, especially considering this guy is leagues above compared to his original Earthrise variant, it is a massive letdown to see that sadly this is just a repaint. Of course, the Studio Series is known for giving us highly detailed, highly accurate versions of the characters, how they actually appeared in the films, whereas Cliffjumper has, to be fair, a really inaccurate robot mode and an incredibly inaccurate vehicle mode, and in all honesty is not an example of how well this line can in fact do. We've seen some wicked figures, and I really was expecting them to hopefully give us a brand new mold for this, but considering that Cliffjumper does indeed actually have an official number within this line, it makes a version 2.0 incredibly unlikely, at least for the foreseeable future. I'm expecting at least 4 to 5 years before we ever see a brand new version of this. So whilst the repaint aspect is cool, the reuse of a mold definitely is not, and that is why Cliffjumper has sadly taken the last spot on the Studio Series ranking for 2021. Following closely behind is the Transformers Studio Series Deluxe Class B127. Now, this guy could have either been the master or unmasked version, and to be honest, it still would have ended up as lowly as it has, just simply down to the fact that I really hate this mold. Of course, this was originally seen with Bumblebee movie Cliffjumper, and in all honesty, I just think it's incredibly lazy, especially when you take a look at the back. When you in fact actually also take a look at some of the newer Cybertronian Bumblebee figures, this guy just looks incredibly outdated, and really and truly adds further insult to injury, as some of those newer releases look almost dead on to how they appeared on screen and can in fact actually transform into super awesome Cybertronian vehicles. And to be fair, as an actual mold itself, it's really not that fun to handle. It's not the best articulated due to all of the kibble that's going on with the legs, and that massive backpack makes him incredibly top heavy, meaning that it's incredibly difficult to in fact actually get him displayed in some cool poses. The only major redeeming aspect that I can find about this guy is now that with the new buzzworthy version, we do finally get the more accurate unmasked head sculpt, which to be fair is actually been painted really nice, and of course that killer looking Cybertronian alt form. But overall, when in comparison to some of the other figures that came out this year, I think it's safe to say that this particular B is incredibly lacking. Zooming in next is the Transformers Studio Series 86 Deluxe Class Blur, our first official 86 ranking for one of these end-of-year Studio Series figures, and to be fair, this is actually a pretty decent mold. The only reason why it's ranked so lowly is that when in comparison to some of the other figures in this subline, he definitely falls slightly short. Most noticeably would be where that arm kibble is concerned. Whilst it definitely harkens back to the original design, it's just way too big and really looks ugly, especially when you begin to manipulate the elbows. I've also found that on my own personal copy that the tabs of which are supposed to hold the kibble in have become incredibly incredibly loose, meaning that practically anytime I pick this guy up, they're continuously dangling down, which makes it super difficult to pose him and actually make him look decent. He's not a figure that I found myself going back to continuously in order to transform and mess around with. I just don't think that he's that enjoyable. As an actual display piece, he looks pretty cool, but this is definitely one that I hope that maybe we can see a version 2.0 of in the future, just to really rectify that arm kibble, as overall that really is the only aspect of which I think this figure falls short in. I think the head sculpt is decent, whilst not as good as I believe it could be. I definitely think it resembles the character. The transformation is interesting, of course. It is a marked improvement when in comparison to its Titan's Return figure, and the Cybertronian hovercraft that he has too is pretty nice, but I definitely would have liked to have seen the inclusion of some wheels, as of course at the end of the day these figures are essentially toys, so it would have been nice to have had some kind of rolling around feature, but as it stands this is definitely one of the worst 86 figures that we've seen so far. Buzzing himself into this ranking video is the Transformers Bumblebee Studio Series Revenge of the Fallen Deluxe Class Bumblebee. Now, in all honesty, I actually think as an actual mold, this is by far one of the best live-action movie Bumblebees that we've ever seen. I really do think it's a fantastic figure, borrows the engineering from the movie masterpiece figure, and overall looks pretty damn awesome. The only reason why this particular version is so lowly ranked on this list is because I just think it's really lazy. Much like B127, this is a figure that they could have done something so cool with. Of course, they did slightly modify the front of the bumper in order to resemble the 2009 concept Camaro, but they didn't go all out in really nailing the look of that vehicle mode, meaning that there are still some inaccuracies, and considering this model now is over 10 years old, this really should have been a figure that they should have nailed the first time round. I also think that considering it's merely just a repaint, they once again should have gone all out in order to retweak some of those areas of which are inaccurate to the 2009 design, and this particular rendition is in fact actually missing paint when in comparison to the first version. So once again, that is a major drop of the ball in my opinion. He also doesn't feature the unmasked head, which once again I think is a massive mistake, and he doesn't also include the over-the-shoulder cannons, which we actually see Revenge of the Fallen Bumblebee deploy at various times in the movie. And in order to add further insult to injury, he does also include a static minifig of Sam Witwicky, of which I have in fact actually lost, which is probably for the best. It has very minimal detail and, to be honest, doesn't resemble the character at all. So in all honesty, I'm really hoping that maybe we can see a version 2.0 of this guy in the future, or at least that the upcoming Dark of the Moon rumored version is slightly better than this Revenge of the Fallen version. Jamming his way onto the lower section of this list is the Transformers Studio Series 86 Deluxe Class Jazz. Now, I know there'll be many of you who are expecting to see this guy slightly higher ranked on this list, but in all honesty, I think that whilst it is a great mold, there's no denying that it's definitely one of the best mass-produced versions of Jazz based on the original G1 series. It is ultimately the QC of this guy which massively lets him down to the yellowing of the white plastic, the massive hollow nature of the design, as well as, of course, the huge issue of the actual back section becoming very brittle over an incredibly short amount of time, and of course breaking, rendering this figure almost useless, especially during transformation. I personally have experienced this firsthand myself, as some of the transformation joints have already become incredibly stressed, and there is in fact already some cracking, and I've only really transformed him a couple of times. For a brand new mass-produced figure, this really shouldn't be the issue at all. I've had figures of which are well over a decade now, which I can actually transform and still have no issues or no worrying that they will in fact break. So to see this modern figure, which is no less than 12 months old, already proving to be an incredibly brittle figure, is definitely not something you expect with modern day Transformers. I think in terms of design it looks awesome, and I think the Poor Short mode also looks pretty decent, but once again, unless Hasbro address these issues and maybe reissue this guy with a much firmer plastic and maybe even a complete solid piece for that back section, this figure forever is sadly just going to remain on the shelf and is very unlikely ever to see the light of day. Sticking with the 86 figures, next up is the Transformers Studio Series 86 Deluxe Class Cup. Now, much like Jazz, this too was also a figure that I really like the look of, I really like the design. I think overall it's probably one of the best cups ever produced, but ultimately, when in comparison to some of the other figures, I think it falls just slightly short. Now, granted, the buzzworthy Bumblebee release is significantly more accurate color-wise and actually fixes the windshield section, of which I know many fans actually had an issue with first time round, but when in comparison to some of the other figures, I do find some of the proportions to be slightly off. He does look a little too skinny in some areas, most noticeably would be within that face. Whilst the sculpt work is fantastic, he really does look rather gaunt, and I do think that maybe they could have squished the head down just to thicken it out a little bit, just to better match how he appeared on the show. But in terms of robot mode, I think he looks for the most part pretty cool. He poses very nicely, and I absolutely love the gimmick that of course you can in fact actually detach all of the limbs in order to create that scene where the giant squid essentially squishes him. He has a pretty cool and very involved transformation, which results in a very awesome Cybertronian pickup mode. So overall, it's definitely by no stretch of the imagination a bad deluxe class figure. It definitely does, however, just have some proportion issues which ultimately let it down when in comparison to some of the other figures on this list. Swinging in at spot number 12, we're once again throwing it back to another live-action movie figure, this time being Transformers Studio Series Bumblebee movie, Voyager Class Thrust. Now, in all honesty, this figure is not bad at all. I barely have any qualms with it. The only reason why it's ranked slightly more lowly on this list is because essentially it is just a repaint and minor retool, but a really impressive one. It takes a character of which barely had any screen time at all in the film, and to be honest, until its official announcement by Hasbro, I actually had no idea that Thrust was in the movie. The colour scheme is of course a major departure when in comparison from his original G1 design, and instead harkens back to the Armada series, which in all honesty I think is a really nice touch. I think the lime green looks fantastic, really complements this mold really nicely, and personally I've always been a massive fan of the Cybertronian and Starscream mold, so I'm really hoping that we can indeed see more of these Seekers in the future. I think in regards to the actual conehead design, it is definitely a really nice take on the G1 design, of course slightly more stylized in order to fit in with the more modern movie aesthetic, and of course this guy does also borrow the head sculpt from the Studio Series Blitzwing, of which is a really wicked looking sculpt. So in all honesty, I think this is awesome. Of course, the Cybertronian Tetrarch mode is not to everybody's personal taste, but as I've mentioned multiple times over on the channel, it is in fact incredibly accurate to how it actually appeared very briefly in the movie. So really and truly, I think this is a fantastic figure, and for those of you into repaints as well as Seekers, then this is definitely one that you're going to want to add to the collection. Sweeping in for a joint 11th place on this list is the Transformers Studio Series 86 Voyager Class Scourge as well as Sweep. The reasoning behind why both of them are in a joint place is because essentially they're minor repaints slash minor retools of each other, and it really wouldn't make sense for me to basically reiterate my thoughts twice on these guys. In all honesty, this is undoubtedly the best Scourge that we have ever seen from the mainline. It is a vast improvement when in comparison to, I believe it was the Titans Return Deluxe counterpart that we got released way back in the day. This is such an amazing update on the character and almost looks dead on to how he appeared on screen. The robot mode looks fantastic, especially from a front perspective. The articulation is really awesome. I think he comes with a great array of accessories, including the blaster as well as blast effect, the first for the Studio Series line, as up until this point blast effects were completely void for this line. I think he's a great looking figure, has a decent amount of paint surprisingly. Really like the addition of the actual filler pieces in order to basically unhollow some of those gaps, which sadly would have merely just been hollow on any other basic figure, and the transformation is very simple yet effective and results in a pretty awesome, almost Cybertronian space boat thing. In all honesty, this is by far one of the best Studio Series 86 Decepticons that we've seen from this line so far, and I am really hoping that we can indeed see more of this quality going forward. The only area where this guy falls slightly short on is that he does sadly have a tiny bit of back kibble where these two major panels are concerned. If they could have found a way to have completely abolished those, this figure probably would have been a solid 10 out of 10. Munching their way into spot number 10 is the Transformers Studio Series 86 Deluxe Class Nor. Like the majority of the figures from this subline, another fantastic update on a really cool character design. Honestly, the Sharkticons are probably one of my favourite Cybertronian designs to come out of that particular movie, and it's so awesome to see them completely revamped here for the Studio Series 86 line, finally in a proper scale as well. Previously, we'd merely only seen them as Scout class figures, but at long last they get a proper deluxe with a higher budget, and in all honesty, it pays off. The Shark mode looks fantastic. Probably one of the best official Sharkticons that we've ever seen. No, actually, it is the best Sharkticon we've ever seen. The actual paint and detail to the face looks terrific. He actually surprisingly has a really nice array of articulation in the actual Shark mode, and surprisingly actually comes with a weapon of which we never actually see him use on screen. This is in fact a homage to the original G1 Sharkticon toy, so that is really nice to see them include. The transformation is very simplistic, yet once again very effective, and actually has some really sweet tricks. Most noticeably would be that rotating chest piece, and then when we take a look at him in robot mode, he just looks like a tiny, very cute looking brute. Really massive and chunky, but once again, very accurate to the animation, and these will no doubt make for the perfect army building piece, as I do in fact actually own 5 of these in the collection. They're that well done. So really and truly, the Sharkticon is a must-have Studio Series figure, especially if you're a fan of the 86 movie or just really obscure looking villain designs. Tuning in now for the halfway spot, and now this is where things get super difficult. It's the Transformers Studio Series 86 Voyager class Wreck-Gar, and I think it's pretty safe to say that Hasbro definitely didn't dare to be stupid when they put this guy together, as he's undoubtedly the best official Junkion Wreck-Gar that we've ever seen, of course being a marked improvement when in comparison to his deluxe counterpart. Now having been upgraded to the Voyager assortment, it literally allowed them to nail the look of the robot mode. If you actually take this bot mode and compare it next to the character model I've seen in the movie, it is literally like looking at the exact same thing. This guy is so accurate. He's also one of the most articulated mainline figures, having encompassed an actual ab crunch due to transformation, which is super cool, and actually comes with a pretty decent range of accessories, those including that spiked axe, as well as of course those two-wheel shields, which are really impressive. I think the articulation's great, the proportions all look great, he's a wicked looking character, and the transformation surprisingly is actually really enjoyable and once again results in a fairly decent looking bike form. So overall, this is by far one of the best Studio Series 86 Voyager figures that we've seen, and I really cannot wait to see as to what Hasbro have got up their sleeves in regards to some of the future upcoming Junkion figures. Next up, we have the Transformers Studio Series 86 Leader Class Slug with Daniel. Now, in all honesty, I think the Dinobots are by far some of the best Leader Class Studio Series figures that we've seen across the entire line. Honestly, the level of accuracy they were able to achieve in not only the Dino modes, but the robot modes as well is truly astonishing. They are literally the definition of a mini masterpiece. They are just so well executed, and considering that pretty much all of the previous Dinobots pale in comparison to these, it really was a massive breath of fresh air to see them at long last be in scale of one another, and of course to be in the leader assortment, the scale class that they always should be in, as of course Dinobots are massive, but Slug here is just such a fantastic figure. In robot mode, he looks super accurate to how he appeared in the animation. I do have some qualms in regards to the proportions, most noticeably would be that I at least find the forearms to be slightly too stubby, but other than that, I think the articulation is great, the overall sculpt is awesome. Of course, he does in fact actually have the toon accurate red head instead of the black toy accurate head, but we will no doubt see a repaint in the future when it actually gets down to the Dino Triceratops mode. My goodness, it actually looks like the exact character model. It looks impeccable. The face sculpt is awesome. The colorization is just impeccable. All of the pieces fill out exceptionally well. Literally, there are barely any hollow spaces on this guy at all, and surprisingly, the articulation is really nicely done. The only downside to this figure, much like Grimlock, is that he actually includes an almost static figure, which to be fair is pretty useless, and in all honesty, I would have much rather seen that scrapped in order to make way for a few of the Dinobots' swords. And I really cannot wait to see how the upcoming rumoured SS86 leader Sludge turns out, as if he's half as good here as Slug, then we're definitely in for a treat. Electrifying himself finally onto this list is the Transformers Studio Series Revenge of the Fallen Deluxe Class Jolt, and in all honesty, I find it rather ironic that this guy did come out at a time where the live-action movie figures for Studio Series were pretty much barren, and he really did electrify the live-action movie fans once more. This guy's been one that I know so many of us have been clamoring for ever since the Studio Series launched. He really lived up to my expectations. This is a fantastic figure. In terms of the level of detail they're able to pull off, it is just exceptional, especially within that torso. I think the head sculpt is pretty cool, of course, being a major departure when in comparison to any of the previous Jolt figures we've seen. This time he is a lot more inspired by how he actually appeared on screen instead of some of the previous concept art. I think the electric whips, whilst are not the best, definitely are a nice utilization of an accessory, and of course they are leagues above anything that we'd seen previously. I think in regards to robot mode, he's pretty accurate. The only reason why he isn't ranked slightly higher up on this list is because I do wish that maybe they could have found a way to in fact actually given him ankle rocker pivot, as he is a little more annoying to in fact actually pose around. But in terms of robot mode, he's a definition of a live action movie figure. He's super detailed, painted pretty nicely, and overall just looks fantastic. I think his transformation is really fun. He's by far one of the most transformed figures that I've actually played around with this year, and his actual Chevy Volt too is very accurate to how it appeared in the film. So all round, this is just such a wicked figure, and it is quite surprising that it really did take them so long to actually put this guy out. So Jolt is definitely worthy of his spot on this list, and in all honesty, it was actually quite difficult to not push him up slightly further. Next up, we actually have one of the first live-action movie figures to be released as part of 2021, that being the Transformers Studio Series Bumblebee movie, Cybertronian and Starscream. Probably one of my favourite Studio Series Voyagers to come out of the live-action movie assortment. I just think he's so awesome. Of course, harkening back to the original G1 design, whilst being a great blend of the modern movie aesthetic, Travis Knight really did something spectacular in that Bumblebee movie, and I really hope this is the Starscream design that we can see going forward for Transformers Rise of the Beasts. This does in fact actually have the most parts count of any Transformers movie figure since the Studio Series launched, making it one of the largest and heftiest figures that we've seen from this line so far. I think he looks super accurate to how he very briefly appeared in the B movie. I know once again that there are many of you out there who aren't in fact actually a fan of this, but when you compare it to some of the CG stills as well as some of the concept art, this is almost pixel perfect to how Starscream actually appeared on screen, and surprisingly, for a Studio Series figure, especially a live action movie one, he's articulated really nicely. I think the transformation is a great blend of what we were used to with the Revenge of the Fallen line, whilst being slightly more sleeker, of course, with modern technology, and it results in a very accurate Cybertronian texture alt mode. So in my personal opinion, this is definitely one of the best Studio Series figures that have been released so far, and as mentioned with Thrust, I really cannot wait to see as to what other Seeker repaints Hasbro and Takara undoubtedly have up their sleeves. Heading his way into spot number 5 is the Transformers Studio Series Revenge of the Fallen Leader Class Grindor with Ravage. Now, I'll be completely honest and say that if this figure for the most part wasn't a repaint, he probably would have taken the top spot, as I absolutely loved what Hasbro and Takara did with Blackout, and I love Grindor even more. He really does perfect on some of those imperfections that were seen with Blackout, such as finally at long last fully articulated wrists. I think the colour scheme too is a marked improvement, this time utilising some of the rust detailing that we saw from Grindor in the ROTF movie. Whilst not the best, I definitely don't think it's the worst, and in terms of level of accuracy, this is probably one of the best live action movie figures we've ever seen. It almost looks like a masterpiece figure. It truly is exceptional. I think Grindor is a fantastic figure, true leader class, and of course he comes packaged with a small version of Ravage, of which whilst I do hope we do see a core class version of it, it's still nice to get that guy into the collection, and I think he looks pretty cool actually being displayed alongside some of the other Decepticons. Grindor of course has a pretty decent range of articulation, while still having some of those limitations as seen by Blackout. The articulated fists truly are the icing on the cake, and when it gets down to transformation, it truly is as if though this guy's been plucked straight out the 2009 era, as the conversion definitely is on the more complex side, and it results in a super awesome helicopter mode. So overall, Grindor here without a doubt is by far one of the best SS figures, and as mentioned beforehand, if he wasn't just a retool slash retweak, he definitely would have probably been the top #1 pick for the best Studio Series figure of 2021. Spot number 4 had to go to the Transformers Revenge of the Fallen Deluxe Class Sideswipe. I did in fact very recently feature this guy on my top 10 favourite Studio Series figures of all time, and in this list once more, this is why he's ranked so highly, because he is just such a fantastic deluxe. Probably the most fun I've had with a live action movie figure this year so far. I truly think that in regards to the robot mode, he looks impeccable. Of course, for the most part being a minor retweak of the Dark of the Moon Sideswipe, of which was already one of the best Sideswipes of all time, this guy really had some of the best paint apps that I've ever seen on a mainline figure. The face sculpt actually looked like a complete brand new sculpt when in comparison to the previous version. That's how well done Hasbro actually did with this particular version. I think the inclusion now of the actual hard top in order to resemble his ROTF look truly was the icing on the cake for me, as in my personal opinion, the actual Corvette Stingray that he had in 2009 was vastly superior when in comparison to the convertible of 2011, and it's always been my favourite alt mode out of the entire Transformers Autobot cast. I think this figure is awesome. Of course, comes with the actual dual blades as well as dual pistols, has pretty decent articulation, and actually in terms of transformation isn't that difficult to go back and forth from robot to vehicle. I think that it's undoubtedly the best Sideswipe that we've ever seen, even beating the likes of the Human Alliance as well as Sidearm Sideswipe. This is probably one of the most accurate live action deluxe figures that we've seen from the Studio Series so far, and for those of you who are a fan of this line, then this is definitely a figure that you have to add to the collection. Down now to the final 3, it had to be given to the Transformers Studio Series 86 Leader Class Grimlock. In all honesty, out of all of the SS86 figures we've seen so far, Grimlock is definitely the king of them all. This guy absolutely blew my socks off when I got him in hand towards the end of last year, and even to this day, it's undoubtedly the best mainline version of Grimlock that we had ever seen. The previous version before this was the Power of the Prime's Voyager, which whilst wasn't bad, of course was a Voyager class, and considering that it was part of a combiner, it definitely had some limitations, whereas this guy completely scrapped that, and instead opted to go for animation accuracy, and oh my goodness, it is all the better for it. In terms of robot mode, he looks even better than the actual masterpiece figure in my opinion. Robot mode looks absolutely sublime, he's greatly articulated, the colour scheme looks absolutely fantastic, the transformation is not too complex nor too simplistic, and it results in a terrific looking King Grimlock Dino mode. I truly do think this is an amazing figure, and much like I mentioned with Slug, I can only imagine how some of the other Dinobots are going to turn out. This guy truly is exceptional. The only downside to him, much like Slug, was that he didn't include include his sword. However, the most recent DNA design upgrade kit does in fact actually fix that, and he of course came with yet another pre-posed figure, that being in the form of Wheelie, which didn't transform and actually was rather awkward looking, so that too was also something that I wish maybe they could have abolished in replacement of a sword. But overall, if you're a fan of Dinobots, you're a fan of the Studio Series line, then Grimlock here is definitely one that you're going to want to add to the collection. As for a figure of which retails for roughly $50, this almost absolutely obliterates the Masterpiece version. Honestly, this figure is just so nicely done. And with that being said, taking the runner-up spot of spot number 2 is the Transformers Studio Series Dark of the Moon Deluxe Class Dino / Mirage. This was a figure that when it was actually announced, my excitement levels literally blew through the roof. This has been a character that I've wanted for almost a decade, over a decade now, considering that Dark of the Moon has literally turned 10 years this year. This figure honestly was just a dream item for me. I never ever would have expected that we would have seen him almost 10 years after his debut, as he never actually received a proper mainline release, of course, when Dark of the Moon first premiered. This guy is everything that I could have wished for and more. Of course, not actually sporting an official Ferrari alt mode due to licensing agreements. I really do think they did a fantastic job in actually harkening back to the Dark of the Moon video game. I think robot mode looks super accurate to how he appeared in the movie. If I had any critiques with this guy at all, it would be that maybe I would have wished for the blades to be slightly bigger, but that's something that no doubt DNA design will in fact perfect in the future. And I also would have loved to have seen the inclusion of ankle rocker pivot, just so that you really could have gotten this guy into some super dynamic poses. But as it stands, he looks so accurate to the film, and once again, truly is a figure that I could never ever have expected. This guy, Dark of the Moon leader Megatron, as well as Dark of the Moon leader Shockwave, were figures that I wanted ever since I was a kid. So the Studio Series truly has answered my prayers, and the only other figures now that I'm really hoping to see from this line would be the likes of an Age of Extinction Galvatron, and of course, even maybe a Dark of the Moon Driller. So Dino, once more, is definitely a fantastic figure, really well built, the engineering is very nicely done, and in terms of accuracy to the film, the robot mode is actually pretty spot on, once more, for one of the first ever figures ever officially produced. So with all that being said, I believe that just about wraps it up here for Dino. This was a figure that nearly took #1 spot, but the next one, truth be told, is probably one of the greatest mainline figures of all time, and it is of course the Transformers Studio Series 86 Voyager class Hot Rod, and my goodness, does this guy truly have the touch and the power. This has got to be one of, if not the best mainline figure officially ever produced by Hasbro and Takara. Literally, when I got this guy in hand, he blew my expectations through the roof and blew my socks off. This guy is incredible. In regards to robot mode, literally, it looks exactly how it did on screen. They truly did do an astonishing job in actually perfecting the robot mode design. He really does feel as if though he was solely engineered by the team over at Takara Tomy, who focused on the Masterpiece figures, as he's just so well designed. I think he comes with a great array of accessories, literally almost everything you would want from a hot rod, including the Matrix of Leadership with an actual Matrix blast effect, 2 blast effects to in fact actually peg onto the exhaust / arm cannons, a buzzsaw, 2 blaster weapons. Literally, he has it all, and that's not even focusing on some of the gimmicks that he has, as he also in fact actually has a retractable visor, which is amazing, as well as an almost wielding tool that we see him very briefly use when of course he does fix Cup Up. I think the articulation is fantastic. He was also one of the first mainline figures besides the Earthrise Optimus to actually incorporate fully articulated hands, which I thought was awesome. And in regards to engineering, literally once more, it is like a Masterpiece figure scaled down, incredibly intricate, almost too intricate, as some of the pegs can prove slightly brittle, but in all honesty, I think it's awesome, and then it results in a very nicely done vehicle mode. So in my personal opinion, this is truly a figure of which I think is well worth the Voyager price point. Of course, he is roughly deluxe in scale, but in terms of complexity to his conversion, accessories as well as gimmicks, I really do think he's worth it. He's such a nice figure, and may in fact actually be one of the best Transformers Studio Series figures of all time. When they introduced this 86 subline into the SS line, my goodness, did this guy absolutely make an impact, and I really think it's going to take quite a lot in order to dethrone him, as he truly is essentially the full package. And so that's a wrap. That was my end of year Transformers Studio Series 2021 ranking video. In all honesty, guys, I absolutely love putting these types of videos out for you. They have in fact become a tradition over on the channel, and for those of you who have stayed tuned for all of them that I've produced since actually being on YouTube, you guys know that I tend to put them out either on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, whereas this one is in fact debuting on Christmas Day, and that's because I do in fact have yet another ranking video just around the corner, of course, of which will focus on the Transformers of War for Cybertron trilogy, as with the release of Blaster as well as the core class Hot Rod, we have sadly actually concluded that chapter in the Transformers Generations line, so definitely be sure to stay tuned for that, as it's going to be a massive massive video focusing on Transformers Siege, Transformers Earthrise, and of course concluding with Transformers Kingdom. As always, I'm super appreciative of your guys' support, in particular on these particular ranking videos, and just in my studio series reviews in general. As mentioned beforehand, they are some of the most popular videos that I do in fact produce over on the channel, and I really cannot wait to see as to what 2022 has in store for us, especially if that Bumblebee movie subline is anything to go by. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this ranking video. As always, please feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Do you guys agree with my thoughts? Do you think that perhaps some figures should have been ranked higher or lower? And as always, please feel free to let me know your own personal rankings, and I would be so appreciative if you guys could all smash that like button. Well, as always, I thank you guys all so much for watching, and until my next video, I'll see you then. I wish you guys all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thanks for watching.